Good morning, everyone. Can we settle down? Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this special transport forum as part of the College of Business and Economics here at the University of Johannesburg with the theme of celebrating 30 years of democracy. My name is Professor Nolene Pisa. I'm the head of Department for Transport and Supply Chain Management here at the University of Johannesburg, and also the director of the Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies Africa, which is also within the Department of Transport and Supply Chain Management. You're all here today to signify the importance of public transportation. And as an institute and as a department, we strongly believe that research plays a critical role in addressing the challenges that our economy and our public transport system faces. And over and above the research, the international experience and the local successes are the keys that are going to unlock the potential of our public transport systems. So the department has had the honor to collaborate with the University of Sydney since 2012. In that collaboration, we have worked closely with Professor David Henscher, whose bio I'll read shortly. We have the privilege of him visiting us today and being part of this workshop. We also have Ms. Darlene Campbell, who is the Executive Director of Urban Mobility at the City of Cape Town. I'll read their bios shortly so that you can understand the privilege you have today to hear this expertise and to be able to engage with these thought leaders and industry leaders in this important issue of public transport. Professor David Henscher is a professor of management and the founding director of the Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies, ITLS, at the University of Sydney. In 2003, Prof. David was appointed as a member of the Royal Order of Australia. He has numerous Australian and international awards, including the Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia, recipient of the 2009 Association of Travel Behavior Research Lifetime Achievement Award, 2006 Engineers Australia Transport Medal, the 2009 Bus New South Wales Outstanding Contribution to Industry Award, and the 2019 John Shaw Medal, which honors an industry champion who has a lasting contribution to Australia's roads. In 2021, an annual prize was established and named in honor of Prof. David Henscher for the best paper in transport demand planning at the Australian Transport Research Forum. In January, a director of the Volvo Educational and Research Foundation, VREF, Center of Excellence in Rapid Transport, in January 2020, he was appointed as a director of the Volvo Educational Research Foundation Center of Excellence in Bus Rapid Transport. He is also a board member of ITLS Africa, and is an emeritus member of the Singapore Land Authority International Advisory Panel 2007 to 2010, which was chaired by the Minister of Transport. He's an honorary member and fellow of the Singapore Land Transport Authority Academy and the co-founder of the International Conference in Competition and Ownership of Land Passenger Transport, the Threadball Series, which has been run for the last 32 years. He has published over 750 academic papers in leading international transport and economics journals, as well as 17 books. and is Australia's most cited author with more than 17,000 citations. Sorry, 75,000. My sincere apologies, Prof. 75,000 citations, not 17,000. Prof. David is a significant mentor for our department and institute, and he has transformed the transport landscape and transport planning, specifically bus contracting in Australia, having a strong and long-standing relationship with the bus industry. So it's my pleasure to introduce and welcome Prof. Henscher to the stage to start his presentation.
Well, it's good to be back. I don't get such a reading of that length in Australia, by the way, so it's very nice. And it's a bit like this is your lifetime to retire. But I'm not quite ready for that yet. So when I was asked to give a talk, there was quite a lot of topics that I thought about. Originally, I was going to talk about a huge area we're working on at the moment called MAS, Mobility as a Service, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, which seems to be going nowhere. So I thought I'd better not talk about that, but I'm happy to answer questions. Or all the work that we've been doing on remote working, which I think is having a huge impact on the transport system. It's one of the greatest unintended consequences of COVID, in my view. But today, partly as a consequence of being asked in Australia to work with the Bus Industry Confederation to do a reset on contracts, given that we felt that many of them are tired, old, lost their way. The regulatory process needs a bit of tidying up. I thought I'd talk about that because this is a topic that I've been giving a lot of thought to. And of course, for those who were lucky to attend the Thredbo conference in Cape Town, there was a lot of discussion about this topic. So let's see how we go. Okay, I always like to start off with this. And in fact, we often tell people that if you ever need to work out how to frame relevance, you need to think of everything you do, not just in bus contracts, in terms of the STO framework. And this is the one we use extensively. I use this all the time when I'm doing anything to do with research or planning or policy advice. You must have a connection between the strategic goals, which is doing the right things, through to the operational goals, which is doing things right. And the middle part, which is often the challenge, the tactical part, is where the regulatory institutional frameworks are, which is the translation of the strategic goals into the operational outcomes. And I think too many people focus on the operational and neglect its link back to tactical or strategic. And I think that's a real problem. And I even include the bureaucracies in many countries where there's a total disconnect between the regulatory framework and why you're doing it. And I'm hoping that that's something that we can try and change in time. But every time you change people in organizations, no matter what they are, you almost have to start again because they're not familiar with these ideals. So things we've learned over the last 35 years, and I choose 35 years because this is very much the period when a lot of this reform, which is in terms of what we've been doing, was led out of Britain with Margaret Thatcher, the then Prime Minister, who decided to, in this sector, she wanted to move away from national government-owned enterprises to deregulation or competitive tendering or negotiated contracts, a whole range of different ways in which we could become more efficient and more equitable in the way we deliver services. So you'll see from this slide is that some of the things we've learned over the years, and I'll talk a lot more about these later, and I'll put my glasses on as well because you might say these are obvious, but you know, often what's obvious is not implemented. And that's the frustration in this industry. We're all going to agree today, but what are we going to do about it? And I have this general view whenever I people talk about their great strategies, I would say, how do you action them? And if you have, tell me how. And then often it's silence. Obviously, the parties need to work together. One of the great themes of the Thredbo series is trusting partnerships. The trusting word is really important. And it means that all parties should learn from each other and trust each other. Doesn't happen, right? I suspect from what I've learned, doesn't happen here, doesn't happen in Australia. We need to put more emphasis on preparing for tenders and negotiation and pre-contract phase. There needs to be a lot more work done up front, where both the operators and the regulators should be willing to share their experiences and helping to keep the contracting process current and fresh, rather than the regulators say, this is how we do it, take it or leave it. It's too much of that, because there's often more expertise with the operator than with the government. In Australia, the regulators turn over every week, almost. The operators don't. But there's this distrust often. The feeling is you're being captured, which is not the case if you've got a good arrangement like we observe and participate in Singapore, for example. And the need for flexibility is really important. I'm going to say a lot more about that. The time has now come, when I talk about how you design contracts, that you mustn't put too much in the beginning, in the bidding process, but you need a framework in which you can reflect and revise, and all bidders need to understand that after it's won, because the market changes through time. The operators need to recognize opportunities through time, instead of being told, sorry guys, 2 years ago you signed that contract, that's what we're paying you for, nothing more. And if you want to be entrepreneurial, too bad. You have to find the money yourself. And if you don't have proper indexation in terms of labor and other things, you can be in serious trouble down the track. And I know that's been an issue here. So we need to avoid lock-ins. There needs to be adaptation, and I'll be sharing that with you. And the idea of maybe moving to longer-term contracts, which often some governments don't like, but we'll come to that. Now, competitive tendering is a bit trendy, right? Around the world. And there seem to be people that think because someone else does it, you should do it. I've done a lot of work and going to show you examples where negotiated performance-based contracts can be just as good and just as cost efficient, but there are some conditions that have to be attached. And one of the things that's done appallingly bad in most countries, no matter whether it's tendering or negotiation, is benchmarking. You need a set of key performance indicators, and I'll be telling you which they should be in a minute, that are going to be essential no matter whether you tender or negotiate. And even if you negotiate, you can build in clauses to say that if you fail to perform, it can be put out to tender. But if you've got an amazing operator already out there in the market delivering, why should you tell them with a 5-year contract that in 2 years' time, which is left, you're going to be tendered? And they'll stop being entrepreneurial because they're worrying about what's going to happen in the future. That's particularly an issue if the operator owns the assets. The Singapore model is interesting. You may know everything's owned by the government, right? The operator just runs the services. All the depots, the purchase of the electric vehicles, the whole lot is done by the government, and it seems to work very, very well. The trouble is government in South Africa willing to take all that financial burden and be totally responsible for a fully integrated planning model? So here we're saying the people involved in strategy should be driving the contracts, not the contracts people driving the strategy, because their role is to implement, not to design. And I'm finding there's a big disconnect in many countries between government agencies involved in the strategic planning and those involved in delivering and regulating the contracts. We need proper incentives as well. Now, abatement is not a good one. I mean, this on-time running thing, maybe in Australia, here, the number of operators are being fined for not being on time because of congestion or something else, and they're blamed for it. And so we need positive incentives, not these abatement or negative types of incentives. And I think we need to think more about it. But then there's an issue here about, well, if we have a too generous set of incentives, how are we going to pay for them if they turn out to be the operator's done such a good job that they're going to be rewarded? And the government say, well, we've got a budget deal, we're not going to modify it. This is where I think you can learn for, say, some infrastructure projects, PPPs, for example. One of the things I'm really keen now on bus contracts is what they call government budget contingencies. These are not variation deals. This is where a certain amount of money every year is put aside in addition to the money that's going to be through the bus contracts, which can be used as appropriate when there's variations in services that are justified by whatever circumstances led to that justification. So to emphasize best practice in contract design, what works? Alignment of expectations and objectives between the parties, and that's not doing really well. I don't know how often the strategy people, the government regulators, the operators, anybody that funds sit down with trust and talks about these things and is willing to move forward. We have that issue in Australia. We're going to try and reset it. there is a lot more, and the unions, by the way, there's a lot more desire to work together now in Australia rather than to compete. We need flexibility to respond to the dynamic context of public transport. It changes a lot, and our contracts are so rigid in terms of what you can and cannot do that it creates these problems I've just hinted at before. And so we need network level incentives to promote integration. I mean, individual operators, we have about 15 separate areas in Sydney. They don't have to work on an island. They need to work in partnership because there's a lot of interaction required in terms of the longer movement of people between contract areas and so on. And this requires trust and requires an understanding of the burden of expense and who's going to pay for it, because it's a value for money proposition. Value for money is what it's all about. So we need to introduce this budget contingency. I've mentioned that twice already because this has become a real buy-in by all parties to protect uncertainty going forward. It's all about risk. How do you define the risk, but who's responsible for carrying the risk, and how do you share the benefits as a result of the future of risk and uncertainty? What does not work is an absence of a trusting partnership, a lack of incentives, and unrealistic expectations. So I'm not going to go through these in great detail, but I can tell you this is just a summary of some of the issues that we discussed at the Thredbo conference. And you'll see that some of them I've already mentioned, and one is flexibility. We need to be less prescriptive and allow contract managers to take on some autonomy to adapt to the local environment. Governments hate that, by the way. Governments like to sign a dotted line that's so rigid that it's almost inappropriate to satisfy the needs of the market. I think those people are called lawyers. They love it. They overprescribe, they don't understand the industry, and they think they're doing a good job by messing everybody around with 600-page contracts in Sydney. And you know, when we moved from diesel to electric buses, they just went through and they crossed out the word diesel and put the word electric in. Well, come on, guys. It's a whole different environment, right? Contract terms. You know, there's nothing wrong with profit as long as profit delivers outcomes that are positive to the market and to society as a whole. And shorter contracts are quite disincentivizing operators who are willing to invest. We have some smart operators in Australia that will invest beyond what the contract tells them to do on the assumption that that might help them re-win their bid. Or in the case of Singapore, the regulator will sit down with the operator on a regular basis and say, how's it going? There's some changes that are required. Let's do it. We'll find the finances to support it. We don't have that in Australia. That's what you signed 5 or 10 years for. That's all you're getting apart from indexation of the relevant inputs. Asset ownership. This is a big issue about the life of the bus. Normally a bus in Australia, 20 years, I'm told it's a bit longer here sometimes. The point is that if we're going to have shorter contracts, the operator's going to, and they're responsible for the asset, they're going to upload the cost of that capital earlier than later and make it a rather expensive bid offer. And that's to your disadvantage if you're an operator that doesn't have that capability of being able to find an alternative. We had a problem some years ago where some operators were cross-subsidizing between different services because they could do that because of the shared cost argument. So they were winning on their avoidable costs, which they could keep low. And the poor guy that was a new start entrant who had to pay for all his capital costs by himself was dead in the water, didn't stand a chance. That's not a level playing field in terms of competitive advantage. So by the way, you can have these slides later. We'll make them available to you. So this is what I think a contract in the future might look like. By the way, there's no such thing as an ideal contract, but there are some good principles to adhere to that might be useful as a cross-check. A less specific contract, talk a bit more about that at the moment, that is flexible and contemplates change. It does require trust and skills across all the stakeholders in the supply chain of this sector. Thoughtful contract terms that overcome the fear of excessive projects or stall change. Asset ownership that avoids stranded asset risk. I've already mentioned that to you. That's a real concern with some operators who are worried about what's going to happen down the track if they've taken on this risk and they're not able to remove it if they especially if it's a net contract. If it's a gross contract, it's a bit safer, but net contracts are a disaster. I wouldn't even go with them. I'm not going to sign my life away with a net cost contract unless I've guaranteed this huge growth in patronage in the market. And most of the markets in the bus sector are not like that anymore. Embrace new data sources to deliver on KPIs that actually focus on customer outcome. You know, we're often told the customer comes first, but often that's not how it's implemented. And that's why if there's a change in the market needs, why shouldn't the contract service levels change? Instead of being told, sorry, you signed a contract that bus A must go on that route at that time of the day. Why you've got bus B on that route? Yeah, what sort of inflexibility is that? We have that in some ridiculous contracts in Australia. This is a big issue. It's known as the theory of incomplete contracts. It's to do with the nature of contracts. What you do leading up to the signing of the contract, which you call ex ante, or what you do after, ex post. We need to move away from detail in ex ante and more flexibility in ex post. And operators around the world are starting to understand this. So in the Netherlands, for example, they are moving away from complex contracts, but advising, keeping them really simple, but telling the operators, whoever wins is going to be able to sit down and talk more detail about designing of the services, because there's often things that come up during the bidding process that you can't do a thing about because that's all you're allowed to bid on, right? And the opportunity to vary it over time after, that's the new Dutch model. That's the Singapore model anyway. And the point is that if the contract is too complex, it's ambiguous. Simple as that. Ambiguity means you end up in the courts most of the time because you overprescribed, and then there's a problem about, well, what did that mean? Oh, the regulator said, I thought it meant that. And the operator said, but I thought it meant that. Well, if you don't go into that level of detail ex ante, but ex post, if there is that concern about something like considering the equity outcomes or a specific service variation on a route, to be able to sit down and discuss it with a budget contingency, if required, actually leads for a much more efficient service outcome, value for money, benefit to customers. And so this is a really important issue that we are pushing very, very strong now. And it's relevant whether you go to tendering or negotiated performance-based contracts. And I'm hoping if there's only one thing you guys get out of today, is to think flexibility going forward and thinking about what you do leading up to the contract winner and what you do afterwards in it, where everybody knows when they bid that that's going to be the outcome of opportunity after, rather than say, oh, it's not fair, that guy that won is now varying the contract. Hang on, you're all told that that's an opportunity once it's agreed on. You know, it breaks down a huge amount of ambiguity. And I don't know, I'm sure the lawyers don't like it because they like detail. But lawyers are very good at creating ambiguity. I'm sure you know that. Any lawyers in the room, by the way? No? Doesn't matter, I'd still say it. So a trusting partnership is particularly important because of the problems posed by incomplete contracts. And that's another thing that's matter. So let's have a quick look at negotiate performance-based contracts and CTs. Give me 10-minute warning towards the end, okay, in case I'm running out of time. As we know, one thing we should mention, historically, almost anywhere in the world, a lot of the initial tendering was converting from a public operator supply to a market one, which could be a public operator bidding, but in most cases, private operators. We normally found a 30% windfall gain in cost in terms of cost efficient, just like that, because of the inefficiencies of a public provider. I'm not sure if that applied here, but it's certainly in many countries around Europe, Australasia, and so on. Then the next, and these might be 5-year contracts. The next time round, there was small cost efficiency gains, right? Little tiddly, maybe 5% if you're lucky. Third time round, no cost efficiency gains and service quality deterioration. And so we start to ask ourselves, how many times do you tender before you start to lose the value of tendering in itself? And that's one reason why we prefer negotiated performance-based contracts, even though they also can assist in the reduction in the cost, improve cost efficiency. And so I just want to share a little bit of evidence with you on that, and give a bit of a plug to Australia, where I think we pioneered a lot of this stuff. And we have a mix of negotiated and tendered contracts, and we've been moving between them. Like Victoria was negotiated for a long time, change of government, different socialist view of the world, we need to tender, right? Tendering is very secretive as well, because you never know what the bid price was of the loser and often the winner. But with negotiated performance contracts, I've normally been able to identify what the like cost per kilometre is. And you need, regardless of what you do, you need transparency and accountability. And this is really such an important role, not just for the regulator, but for government. You know, our regulator decided in Transport for New South Wales that they didn't want to tell anybody anything. So they told the Auditor General to get lost, because I was the outside person that assessed all this stuff. And he was furious because we don't even know anything about the performance of these operators at the moment, unless you're in the regulatory organisation or you're the consultant, lucky to do the numbers, but they won't tell you, of course. So you need performance benchmarking subject to independent verification. It's no good saying, like Transport for New South Wales, oh, we look at the numbers. We don't, nobody else looks at them. That's not independent verification. We need an open book approach to costs, independently audited, and we need public disclosure. You know, if we knew what the full set of prices were, it's a healthy outcome, because this is taxpayers' money. We want to know who won by how much and who lost by how much. And not going to go through this in too much detail. You'll see this later, but there's a whole bunch. What happened there? How come this screen here is different to that screen? What's weird? I'm on a different screen to that on here. Why is that? That's not the screen I want to be on. I want to be on that screen. Anyway, while
doing magic
working it out, I've already talked about that screen, so maybe it's the next one. We did a lot of work a few years ago to come up with a series of key performance indicators. And I made a big distinction between key performance indicators and key compliance indicators. Regulators love key compliance indicators. Pick a box you filled in a report or piece of paper. Too many of them. We have about 30 of them, and now we have about 8 key KPIs. And KPIs, or key performance indicators, are what really matters in terms of cost efficiency, cost effectiveness, service levels, customer satisfaction. That's not compliance indicators. That's this tick a box type stuff. And so I just put a slide up which I'm not going to go through in the interest of time, that actually indicates what those KPIs we would recommend are, including a safety one, by the way. And just a moment. No, lovely picture, but not mine. Get up here. So, it's often always the responsibility of the operator. Well, in fact, when you look at operator performance, we must distinguish those things under the control of the operator, those under the control of government, and those under the control of the market. And many of the things that happen out there in terms of problems with delays or whatever it is, congestion causing, they say that's the operator's fault. This stuff needs to be clear in the contracts as well. And even I'm very disappointed that people love to use on-time running as the major benchmark because they reckon it's easy to measure that. When you talk to customers, there's a lot of other factors that matter, not just the on-time running, which can cause bunching and all sorts of other things. So we need to separate out the sources of control, and then we can identify a reasonable amount of influence. But historically, it seems to be operators get frustrated because they're blamed for things they have no control over. So what you need to do, and I'm about to show you, we do some comparisons. I've been fortunate enough to get access to confidential data on most of the tenders and most of the negotiated contracts in metropolitan Australia. And obviously I can't tell you who's who because I had to sign that, and we've done some comparisons and adjusted for the context in which they operate as a result of things like if you're in a more heavily congested area or not, which affects speed, right? Or you get a lot more peak to off-peak ratio requirements for bus services and so on. And so you need to do that, otherwise you can't compare. You just compare apples with oranges. So you need to normalize. Whenever you're doing any work on network effectiveness or cost efficiency, if you benchmark, you must normalize to understand the things that cause differences that are either not under the control of the operator or cause differences that are under the control of the operator. But in fact, they should be doing something about it. So these are the three. These are the main ones. We've done a lot of work on this. Average speed is a really good measure of a lot of the problems where you've got differences to do with congestion and so on. We haven't allowed for accidents and breakdowns and stuff. That's also an issue, but that's a reflection of poor maintenance of a vehicle sometimes, or the driver's not properly trained. Spread of operating hours, big issue, because if you end up with operating hours that are in certain times of the day where there's more heavily congestion or not, that can affect the performance. And the average bus utilization, which of course the service kilometers per peak bus can vary quite substantially. So that little diagram that's there is a whole bunch of operators. And what we did a benchmark and came up with what we would regard as a median value. Don't use averages. By the way, if anybody in this room is a student, don't use averages, because most of the distributions are non-normal. You need to use a median, otherwise you get a distorted answer. I say that all the time and consultants ignore me. They need to go back and learn statistics. Anyway, that's another story. And so is that one not working either? Doesn't it like that diagram? Oh, I got a beautiful diagram here and it doesn't like that one either, Harry. What's going on here? Oh dear. And that's not the one, but I tell you what the diagram should be saying if you can see it, right? So we've come up with some gross and net cost efficiency measures. Gross is if you ignore these differences, and if you control for them, you get a net measure. And what I'll just quote, because I can't. 4 operators under negotiated contracts outperform the best CT, and there are another 10 negotiated ones that outperform the rest of the competitive tendering. So overall, most of the results in Australia suggest that with proper benchmarking targets, negotiated performance-based contracts generally offer a more cost-efficient, almost up to 4% better gain than in all the capital cities than competitive tendering. And by the way, competitive tendering has a higher transaction cost as well, a huge amount compared with negotiated contract. So, oh, I've lost this one now as well. We could have just moved to the next slide and ignored that. No? So what am I going to tell you by way of commentary? So when I look at competitive tendered prices and negotiated performance outcomes, the evidence suggests that gains from competitive tendering are often illusory, rather than some perception that for transparency we must tender. We generally find in Australia that as long as the negotiated process is consistent with the national competition laws in terms of transparency and adds benefits that can be measured, then there's no case to argue that you have to go to tendering all the time, because tendering also has some non-competitive outcomes in terms of the way in which the bids are assessed. Now, I don't know who does the assessment here and what expertise they have and how much bias they build into the process. I'm not going to comment, but this does exist. So despite government suggesting that competitive, can we try the next slide? No, that's not the one I have in mind, but okay, that's the one after. I'll get to that slide, so don't get rid of it. Many governments suggest that competitive tendering ensures transparency, but the practices of CT does often not ensure that is valid, as details of tender review and assessment are rarely published and claims of cost saving cannot be verified. And I have to say, this is even worse now when we're tendering with ZEBs. Now, I don't know how you do that in South Africa, but the operators have to tender and they have to get the price of the ZEB and so on. But there's been increasing talk about government sharing some of that risk, but we haven't yet signed off on that. A private operator recently bought a ZEB bus and said he's going to put it on this route just to get used to it because he purchased it. And the government said, you're not allowed to do that. You're only allowed to operate a diesel bus on that route. He said, well, hang on. I've just bought that as not to actually see how it goes. Oh, no, it's not in your contract. This is this problem of lack of flexibility, right? And a really good operator. So let me just say, these are some important things for you guys. Independent of what model you choose, there are some conditions that must be satisfied in order for you to be able to say that what I'm saying is really going to work. A mature market of competent private operators, We have that in Australia. I know in South Africa, there was a time when government would subsidize an operator to enter the market because there weren't enough of them. But as you get more operators, I don't know whether that applies to South Africa or not. But if you don't have a competent set of private operators, and you go to tendering or even negotiation with a threat of tendering, you have a bit of a problem. You know, New Zealand, until recently, and we had to work on changing it, they had one bidder, and that was the incumbent. Next time round, they had one bidder. That was the incumbent. I'm not going to go through the history of how that was manipulated, but very clever. And that had to change. The regulator must have the right skills. One of my Threadbow conference themes is we need to regulate the regulator. Another way of saying we need to train them to understand the market. How many people in Transport for New South Wales and the regulatory have no understanding of the bus sector? They've never gone and learned how it works. That's not a good trusting partnership. And instead of being told when I try to help them, sorry, Professor Henscher, we know what we're doing. We don't want to talk to you. That's sad, isn't it? We need a suitable monitoring of performance. And that, you know, one of the things that often gets hit when there's a budget constraint is marketing and monitoring. And yet it's so important. And we need a commitment to building a trusting partnership. I'd like to see regulators and operators swap jobs occasionally and learn what the other person does and understand the constraints. I am actually quite sympathetic for some regulators because they tell me, gee, I better do what I'm told, otherwise I might lose my job, rather than I don't agree. We need to do something about that. Now, this is an interesting one. This is some recent work we did to look at this is a transaction cost adjustment. So when you've got a bidding process, this is based on a global survey, CT evaluation committees, not always, do not recognize the inherent risks of changing the service provider. And we found, and I'm going to give you an example here, you can see it on the right, that an average of 1% markup on the lowest offer price to account for disruption costs should be considered. So let's look at this example. Suppose an incumbent offer is 140 million, just a make-up example, and the lowest offer price to a non-incumbent was 120. You could say risky, maybe not. There are generally some comparative advantage of someone that's been operating the services for a while. If not, they should have been out a while ago anyway. They should have been kicked out for other reasons. Offer prices of the provider A, another non-incumbent, is 125. So you've got this range of prices. And we've estimated the changeover costs of a provider A is 12 million. It's about 10% of the lowest offer price. So when we adjust for this risk, this normalized offer price of provider A, which is 125 plus the bid, which is 143, we find that the incumbent is less expensive. Right? Now, I fiddled that example just because I want to make the point. It's not always the case. But the point is, from a whole range of projects we looked at around the world, it turns out that there's a high transaction cost with it linked to risk, if you like, of letting an incumbent be assessed identically to a new bidder when in fact there are some comparative advantages that haven't been properly accounted for in terms of risk structure. I would suggest this could apply to anything. Now, transitioning to net zero. Oh, by the way, we had that slide, didn't we? I can't move to that slide either. I want to talk about transitioning to net zero. One of the things that we've learned, I've written a lot about this. Let me see if the next slide comes up and we'll leave it at that. No, it doesn't come up. One of the things we've learned is that we're now moving into a much stronger recognition of the role of the supply chain. And if you want to go to the extreme, it's right from when you mine products, if you're talking about CO2 impact, mining right through to disposal, reverse logistics. And currently, most of the contracts is between a bus operator and the government, right? We have one in Sydney now that's between a bus operator, an infrastructure design company, and the government, because they can take advantage of that other expertise that the operator doesn't have in terms of the way they design their depot. And designing the depot for alternative fuel vehicles, be they hydrogen, electric or what, there are so many variations, including maybe not changing the depot at all and doing all that stuff off-site somewhere else. And that whole debate is still evolving. So, okay, so isn't that funny? Okay, so I'm going to talk about this. This is quite innovative. This is our view as to what future contracts should look like as we move to clean energy vehicles. And historically, all these people have sort of had a role. Like we've got the chassis and body suppliers, we've got the battery or fuel supply guys now coming in. They're very important. You've got the bus operator, you've got the energy provider. So you've got all these different people, which and you've got the financial planners and the service planners. And historically, they've normally just been a consultant, if required, to the bus operator or sometimes to the government. There's now been a suggestion that we should start sharing the risk. Share the risk where the benefits are. And we've got some operators in Australia that are now partnering to get the best price for batteries, to get the best price for financing their buses, to get experts to help to redesign their depots, where they're not just a consultant, but we're saying, you guys, why don't you join us and become part of the collaborative model? And you can get some benefits out of it than just being paid to do something. And that's starting to happen slowly, though. I think the regulator is having trouble in understanding it. Right? One regulator said, oh, that's not right, because then a chassis operator could be advising more than one contract. I said, well, to be honest, depending on how it's set up, what's wrong with that? And to me, we call this the supply chain partnership. It's similar to the idea of PPPs in infrastructure. Nothing new, but never been applied in this industry, as far as we know, with one or two small exceptions. And so we're talking about collaborative contracting, which is well known. It's all to do with risk sharing. I think we need to spend more time on what are the risks? What are the benefits? Who should support the risk because they get the benefit? That's a really good question. And now we're starting to find that those operators that are partnering like this are having a competitive advantage in the bidding process. But there's only a few doing it at the moment. And I think the regulator, yet again, has got to grow up and say, oh, we don't know anything about this, or we think it's dodgy or whatever. But it's not, if done properly. So I'm a big fan of that. And we've written quite a bit papers, happy to share them with you if you want, because it means that the future lies in this space. By the way, as an aside, before I think about it, you may have the same problems we have in Australia, the shortage of drivers, bus drivers. You got enough. Oh, we'll send them to Australia then. We have a real problem during COVID. And then because the operators were criticised for not being able to put all buses on because there was a shortage of drivers. Because you get paid better by working at McDonald's. And we're trying to do something about it. But one of the things that I've been doing working with CDC, which is the Singapore company that's in Australia, Comfort Delgro, is saying, don't hire someone as a bus driver, hire them as somebody that can create a career in the bus company by doing other things as well. So part of the day they might drive a bus, part of the day they might do maintenance, part of the day they might be in the office. That gives them a career. So don't advertise for a bus driver, advertise for someone to have a career in the bus industry. And it's starting to work for CDC. It's a trial, right? But then again, this is another example where some companies are old-fashioned. Oh, no, no, no. A bus driver is a bus driver. I used to call them passenger captains, but I was told that was overkill. So we're looking always for innovative ways. And of course, if you tell them, they'll learn a bit, that they can be trained, because all the diesel guys still have to be trained as well. They can be trained to manage an electric bus. They get excited about it. And then you can go out and drive it part of the time, you know. So these sort of models, multitasking through the training, it's good rather than say you have to be a mechanic, or you have to be a driver, or you have to be an admin person. You can have mixed portfolios. It's a training issue, and it just takes time. You need clarity of goals throughout all the people in the supply chain. You need trust and respect. That's an issue. We're getting better at that in Australia, but you know, trust and respect does require the willingness to sit down, like they do in Singapore, like they do in the Netherlands, and talk through the issues that have common interests. Common interests. A seat at the table. What I mean by that is operators or their association should be involved in the entire process rather than say, sorry, you guys can't be involved in reviewing the quality of the contracts or anything because you're going to be biased. No, there's got to be a way of doing. We have our bus associations now that are very much active with government in sitting around the table and talking about things because they don't own bus companies. And they believe they're doing it in the interest of the industry, not in the interest of a particular bus operator. Renewal. That's a complex issue, and I've talked about that as to what's the process of renewal. And once again, I think that needs to be clear and unambiguous. And we're going to suggest that longer-term contracts with appropriate benchmarking is going to create a more sustainable industry than these short-term contracts. And budget contingencies, I've talked about that. This is the fourth time I've mentioned it, right? I do think that's really important. So governments can't turn around and say, sorry, there's really important changes required, but we have no money. That's not a good customer focus. And we know in Australia, maybe here, if you put that into a budget annually to provide services, but you don't spend it on the operators, but it's there if needed to justify changes that are negotiated in a sensible way by a panel, not just throwing money at one operator because he talks loud, then I think that's a good idea. Here we are. There's no such thing as an ideal contract. I'm not going to go through the details, but during one of the Threadbow conferences, we did a survey to identify all the things that matter. Let me try and summarize the main points I've just talked about, and then we'll pass over and have Q&A at the end or whatever. Flexibility ex post is so important. Overprescription ex ante is causing so many problems in terms of the ability to adjust services in a way that's justified. The budget contingency must be there, though, to ensure that we can fund it. As we transition to electric buses or hydrogen buses, I haven't talked about hydrogen, but that's also of interest, then I think we've got to reappraise the risk profiles. And we don't want to send bus operators to the wall because they have no understanding of this market because they've been told to fund it all. We know in many countries that's not happening now. Governments said we have to provide funds for transition, otherwise there's no way it's going to occur. But as you know, an electric bus is like 50% more expensive at the moment, let alone the battery technology that's required as well. The good news is I think battery prices are coming down. I got another lecture, which I'm not talking about. Huge drop in battery prices. We also used to think that the operating costs and maintenance costs of electric bus would be far lower than a diesel, but it depends on energy prices. And I'm sad to say in Australia, electricity is dearer than petrol per kilometre now. So we killed off that advantage. And I'm not sure what it is here. And the uncertainty about the grid. I mean, we've been enjoying no power, no power here while we've been here, which is, it's okay. We got used to it. And that might impact the operation of these vehicles, especially with your charging through the batteries. So I'm going to finish there, I think, other than to put my last slide on, if you could. No, not that one. That was, no, I'm not going to talk about mobility as a service, but let's just stop there. I have some lectures on mobility as a service, and I'm happy to talk to you about that because I was told by one of my good friends here that train people are wondering whether they should do a first last mile with Uber as part of a mobility as a service model. And I said, you must be joking. And I'll tell you why if you want to know. We've done a huge amount of work around the world on mobility as a service. We now call it mobility as a feature. You might say, why? Because the transport operators don't like generally working together. And secondly, there's not enough in it to actually change travel behavior in sustainable ways without having non-mobility service providers coming in and providing additional incentives through the subscription program. And that's why myself and a guy called Sampo, who started WIM in Finland, has sadly gone into administration because of all the challenges of getting this stuff off the ground, are called Mobility as a Future. And I'll leave you with one comment. If you're interested in mobility as a service and you spend all your time trying to work with the transport operators, you're looking in the wrong place. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof, for that wealth of wisdom and experience. Please keep your questions, note them down so that you don't forget them. We'll have a panel discussion right at the end. And apologies for the technological glitches. As you know, technology likes to show you flames when you're supposed to be at your best. Okay, so moving on, we are on to our second speaker, Ms. Darlene Campbell. As I've previously indicated, she is the Executive Director of Urban Mobility at the City of Cape Town. She is qualified as a transport economist, of course, from the best university in the country, the University of Johannesburg. And she has 39 years of experience. She's also a member of the UATP Vice Chairperson of the UITP OAC in Cape Town. She has experience both internationally and locally in transport planning, public transport operations, and management, as well as a transport economist. She worked for 7 years as a consultant exclusively on all major cities in Australia, New Zealand, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East on public transport planning and operations projects. She has a proven track record on working with central and local government entities and the private sector to be at the forefront of transport planning, delivery, and operations of multifaceted public transport projects. For example, she has fulfilled very senior roles in public transport planning and operations at the National Department of Transport in South Africa, managed public transport for the City of Cape Town, and was a manager for contract development, negotiation, and management of the MyCity BRT system. Darlene has also provided specialist transport advisory services and is very proficient at engaging at political, executive, stakeholder, and supply chain levels to achieve outcomes sought for. Her negotiation skills are evident in the negotiations with the minibus taxi industry in Cape Town, resulting in the formation of 2 companies taking up major shareholdings in the N2 BRT 12-year contract and the re-establishment after being appointed ED, it was suspended for 2 years, as well as chairing the minibus taxi tax team after the 2023 strike. Darlene stepped out of her comfort zone in public transport planning and is now overseeing the Urban Mobility Directorate, implementing an active turnaround strategy since 2020 and culminating in a happy workforce, being effective and efficient, implementing innovative transport solutions in the Directorate. It's my pleasure to welcome Darlene, and her talk today is 30 Years of Democracy, an overview of public transport in South Africa.
The minibus taxi is playing an minibus taxi, yeah, that's better, is playing a fundamental part in the IPTNs. And we tried as government to actually, especially on local level, to nullify that, but very quickly realized that that is not going to happen. And then where are we going after 2024? What is the future next? And here I will very much concentrate on what we're doing in Cape Town, because that is where my biggest knowledge is, and that is the program that I'm driving at the moment as well. So in terms of public transport, the status quo, we know that we've got commuter rail, but due to everything that happened during COVID and post-COVID, we know that the system is not where it has to be. In the Western Cape, we work very closely, the City of Cape Town with PRASA, to actually bring back the rail system. And at this stage, we know that we're looking at the middle of 2025, the Central Line, which is the major line in Cape Town, should be back on track. And so a lot of informal dwellings and has been deployed on the railway system during COVID. And that has caused a lot of problems for PRASA itself. Then we've got our conventional bus services. There were many in the past, but the only ones really functioning today is the Golden Arrow bus services and PUTCO. But those of you who might know the history of public transport, there was also Algoa Bus, and there were Northwest Star, etc. And those bus companies has all disappeared. But they received their grant funding from the provinces. And then we've got this whole part of the industry that are regulated by the local government and the BRTs. There's also, of course, metro buses, like the metro bus in Johannesburg, where I can just tell you that's where I started on the 1st of December 1984. So I'm also a bus person. And I'm a bit worried about the electric buses coming in and not smelling the diesel anymore. But that's a discussion for another day. But so buses are in my blood, although I had to, like everybody else, become completely modal agnostic. We work very closely also with the minibus taxi. There was various programs through the years to actually reform the minibus taxi industry, and the strike of last year in Cape Town really put the city on the back foot, and we realized how important the industry is for us, especially when we started getting things like food shortages in areas, etc. E-hailing, of course, has become a major part of the whole landscape. And then your non-motorized transport, towards we are giving a lot of attention these days, and also including it in this last mile area. And then, of course, universal accessibility. Okay, and the first rail is on national level, like I said, conventional bus services on provincial level, and then the municipalities on the local level. The municipalities are especially, and then the metros are responsible for the integration of all of these services. And just my next slide to show you what we are talking about. I took specifically Cape Town here as an example. You will see that the first Golden Arrow horse-drawn bus was in 1801. So it is not a company that just has been established yesterday. They had their first diesel bus in 1861, and they now have electric buses. And that is why I actually put the whole montage in there, because that really shows you the progression that we have gone through and that we can do that. We've got Metro Rail, we've got the BRT, My City bus services, Dial and Ride. It's the only specialized, universally accessible and service in the country for people with disabilities. Then the minibus taxi industry are a big stakeholder for us. And then metered taxis, e-hailing as the next. And I've put there the road because, as you said, Prof, that except for rail, everything else is on the road, in road infrastructure. So whatever we do, every congestion relief program we have, it is about getting people out of their cars and onto the buses, bigger vehicles, so that we can reduce congestion. And when we have our congestion relief program, where we specifically develop infrastructure like roads, it is also to make space for dedicated public transport. Okay, over the 10 years, what has happened? Over the 30 years, and I'm going to take it again into 10 years periods to go through this. And I'm going to bring them all up so that we can just have the whole picture here. Before 1994, as we said, there was a lot of political instability, which also had then its results in the public transport sector. Going over to the democratization and the democratic public transport system, And then the constitution was very important. It gave us, as the municipality specifically, a very clear role in Schedule 4B, that we are responsible for municipal public transport. We can have many a definition for that, but the constitution also says very clearly that the planning and the operation of public transport should be done on the lowest level or sphere of government. And that is why it is for the people, by the people. And as our disabled community always say, you will not plan for us, you plan with us. And that is something that I do live by. We also had the National Land Transition Act. And I don't know if it is a privilege or whether people want to shoot me, but I was actually the author of that one. And we did our first public transport records. These days, it's just one part of our comprehensive integrated transport plan, where it is the register. But at that stage, it was a big thing to actually try and find out what facilities do we have in public transport. What is the quality? What is the quality of the services being provided from those facilities? And it was actually a quite important piece of work that we started to do then throughout the metropolitan and biggest cities and towns. Between 2004 and 2014, as I said previously, we had the major event of the FIFA World Cup. And this gave rise to BRT. But everybody was talking about wherever we roll out BRT, we are going to take off the full minibus taxi services. And we're going to pay them out, and they're going to go away and become part of these VOCs or vehicle operating companies. And we're going to all live happily ever after. And that did not happen. Although we paid billions of rands in various metropolitan areas and towns for those licenses, the industry then there was people coming in and actually then just taking over the routes with illegal vehicles. And also at that same time, we had the implementation of the National Land Transport Act. And as you know, an amendment has been done. It was signed off by the president. But it has not been demarcated yet, so it's not in law yet. After 2024, we then had the commuter rail has gone down, and then BRT rollout. Sorry, I can't see you now. I also take this. Sorry about that. I just need to see, because I don't want to give you the wrong information here. The BRT rollout in major cities started, but we know that the only places where it's really been rolled out is in Cape Town, Johannesburg, a little bit in Tshwane, and George has got a system, but it's not a BRT system. It's a new bus system. And also that we had the funding changes, the minibus taxi strike, and COVID. COVID was a huge throwback for all of us. And because public transport and specifically the bus services were not an essential service, we started losing our passengers. And I can very happily say today that in August of this year, we had the most passengers on MyCity that we've ever had, even pre-COVID. And we also had our highest turnover at the fare box of 43%, where the world basic is around 30%, the average. So we are really doing very well. And we are starting with the rollout of our phase 2A very soon. So what will the future have for us? We are planning for in an uncertain time going forward. One of the things that did not happen, and the RDP and everything spoke about that when we started in 1994, and that was to close the spatial divide of our cities. And that did not happen at all. You still see that our poorest of the poor stays outside of the cities, very far, long distances. My longest bus route from Atlantis to Cape Town is over 45 kilometers. It is my highest passenger route as well. So, but still, it just shows you that we did not do that. Increasing access to socioeconomic and housing opportunities, again, that did not always happen. And we have to take a really strong stance to actually now make sure that it happens in the future. Reducing carbon emissions, as well as making mobility more affordable to all our people. With the demise of rail, that did not happen in this last 10 years because rail because of the masses that they can carry in our country and in our cities, that it is the cheapest form of public transport. And then also information in technology and innovation. So what can we learn from the 30 years to make these benefits real that we are talking about? And I'm just again going to quickly put all of them. I think that's all of them. One back. Okay, the rise of the democratic state and the emergency from transport responsibilities. Prior to 1994, public transport services were fragmented, and it's still today fragmented. So we didn't really learn from the past, did we? And how are we going to turn this around? In the 80s, we had low government investment. Rail relied strongly on subsidies and cross-subsidization. At one stage, we know that the commuter rail services were basically subsidized by I don't know, many of you might not be old enough to still know about an overnight sleep train where you went to Cape Town or Durban and you slept in nice coaches, and there was a lot of cross-subsidization within the rail space. There was a lot of violence that happened before the elections, and then also the historic bus companies were starting to, their contracts came to an end and they went on to this month-to-month type of contract, and things didn't go very well for me from there. So between 1994 and today, we had a democratic constitutional era, which included visions of allocated powers to the 3 spheres of government: public transport functions, municipal plans, transport functions, specifically ascribed to local government. We are doing all these plans day to day, and I actually said to Prof earlier this morning that one of the things that for me is something that we must really look at, and that is that we have plans. We have good plans. We've got brilliant plans. Having worked in the international arena, I know we have some of the best plans, but we do not implement our plans. Because every 2.5 years, you either have a local government election or you have a national and provincial election. We've got a new boss in place and we change our plans. And we must make sure that we have robust plans, plans that is apolitical, plans that is there for our people, not for grandstanding, not to have nice, it's really boring to have a report on in my rack and having that prepared. Let me tell you, I now with the phase 2A that we are building, I never knew that me as a transport economist can get excited about pipes being delivered to lay in the ground for the infrastructure. I never knew that I can get excited about a bridge that got its number. Can you imagine that? Because at last I am seeing something of all these plans that we have been doing over all these years. And to know that that bridge, we call it the Sky Circle in Cape Town, and I have a picture of a rendering of it, is just a public transport bridge. Nobody else is allowed on that bridge, so that we can give advantage to public transport over private transport. Okay, the program of reform in the public transport landscape supported by the white paper of 1996. I know we had an update of the white paper, but that white paper encapsulated everything that we had to do, everything that we needed to do, and we can implement that as well. There were certain visions from the white paper, from the RDP, and from GEAR that was then included into the National Land Transport Act. I have already spoken quite extensively about the development of the integrated public transport plans, the implementation of BRT, and then also we had capital investment in the years between 2004 and 2014. And one of the big projects here in Gauteng was the Gautrain, which we opened in the Sandton Station the day of the first World Cup match. And I was privileged to be here and to actually be at the opening as well. And then we had the different minibus transport station programs like the recapitalization program, but we are not sure that those work. I don't think so. Gautrain is, but the recap, not really. And then, of course, we had the BRT, and here is just a current network plan for the BRT in Cape Town. And also then you will see at the bottom here to the right, the two new lanes that we are building in Khayelitsha and Mitchell's Plain. And that is where BRT can play a big role, because it's high density and it is to areas in the city where people do not have access to, even by rail. Then just two examples of the BRTs that has happened since the 2010 FIFA World Cup. We got a lot of money in those years for capital. We're still getting a lot of money for capital, but it seems that we keep on forgetting we must run these things afterwards. Hey, people, we need operating funding. Treasury, we need operating funding. Cities can't sustain these systems if we do not get financial assistance from the national government, specifically for the operating of the systems. People forget we have to maintain these facilities. They forget we are running them on roads, and the roads must be maintained. So what we have started now is to actually do an assessment of our phase one infrastructure and working out what is the maintenance that we require over the next couple of years. Our ticketing system is coming to its end of life. What are we going to do? The minibus taxi has, as I said previously, had a big role to play in the advent of all our public transport. In other countries, they call it paratransit, and they have a huge role. And I'm also on the paratransit committee of the UITP, and we're doing a lot of work together to look at the formalization, the legalization of them. Some of the characteristics or elements of the BRTs is that they are trunk direct and feeder routes, dedicated right of way, and our dedicated right of way really works very well. You will know it maybe as the pink roads in Cape Town, because that's the bus routes. And we've just last month opened our on the West Coast, we could only at the stretch build one lane and not two. So in the afternoon, it's now a reversible line. So we have a contra flow on that stretch that makes sure that the buses do get the advantage in terms of time. We've got median stations, automated fare collection. They're all universal accessible. And then also the minibus taxi industry runs with 3 of the 4 contracts that we have in the city of Cape Town, with Golden Arrow have one of the other contracts. Quickly, I mentioned Gautrain. It is also a rapid rail network, automated fare collection, the same thing. And it is a choice for users. And you did see some of a modal split to the Gautrain from car users, which has not happened with the BRT, because it was still mostly people coming out of taxis, or people who didn't have cars at that stage that's using the BRT, but it's not the people who are currently in their cars and getting them out of their cars. And that is why we must look at the standard also. And of course, the governments of the adjoining municipalities in Gautrain was very important, with Tshwane, Johannesburg, Ouer Tambo, Santu, all of those areas being linked together. I must say, normally I come up to Joburg once a month because my daughter is still here, and then I use the Gautrain to Hatfield. And last night it was a bit dodgy driving with a car in such a long time in Johannesburg. You do forget how to drive, hey, if you're not in Joburg. But that's just on a lighter note. But so I prefer now these days taking the Gautrain when I'm here. Of course, it was also established in terms of an act, and then Prof, you will see everything here are regulated. We can't move without any regulations and an act. I spoke about I mentioned the minibus taxi recap program. That was a program that was conceptualized already in the 90s, and it only came to fruition in 2007, where they took off old vehicles, crashed them, and then paid out the taxi owners for those vehicles. A lot of old vehicles has been taken off the roads at that time, but it has become quite an expensive thing to do. So how long government can still carry on with this, we're not too sure about. You also will get these slides for more of the facts that's in them. Okay, then as I said, I'm going to speak to you a bit about the lessons learned from the BRT rollout. And so, as I said, that everybody thought that we can get rid of the minibus taxis when we started off with BRTs. And that did not work really very well. BRT is to supplement urban public transport, and also in areas where rail is not available. For instance, on the West Coast, although it is not the best route if you look worldwide, because of the swamps and the sea on the one side and the lagoon on the other side, you will never build there. So you won't get high rises there. But because we have such a huge capacity of people coming from the Atlantis area, it still makes a lot of sense. And there is a lot of development happening a bit more to the west of that area. But there is an area that's quite dead when you do drive there. And although in the early years, we had high operating and capital costs were required in actually to optimize the services. City also increased their own revenue over time, and then also the BRT operations had to increase due to the decline in rail, as we have spoken about. So what was the lessons learned? The first lesson was that the full replacement was neither appropriate nor financially viable. And in phase 2, the Khayelitsha, Mitchell's Plain area, we're not going that way at all. Although there will be VOCs, vehicle operating companies, with the minibus taxi industry on the main trunk routes, we are seeing the rest that they will provide the feeder services. We're not going to buy those expensive 9-meter buses again. And that runs our feeder routes at the moment on the West Coast. And then the role of the minibus taxis, as I said, has completely changed. BRT and minibus, conventional buses and rail will all be integrated and are being at the moment in our new integrated public transport network plan that we are busy with at the moment, will be integrated. In the right-hand corner and above, that is what we call the sky circle. As you can see, the buses will move over there. The bottom here, it's one of the most busy intersections in the city of Cape Town. So normal traffic will still carry on underneath and the buses have free flow over there. Okay. You can put that up, yeah. Okay, in terms of PRASA, although there was a lot of underinvestment historically in the infrastructure and rolling stock, we know that PRASA has been investing quite a lot of money over the last year to 2 years in bringing back the services. Last year was the first year in last financial years, was one of the first where they actually spent all their capital funding to actually replace the infrastructure and rolling stock. Okay, we can carry on. I've already said all of that. So how did they do it? Because that was very interesting, is that, as you know, people stayed on the railway lines. They removed all the overhead cabling. They removed the sleepers. I can't believe what they did with those. Still wood sleepers I can understand, but not those concrete things. What do you do with that? But anyway, they even took that out. And so they restored the rail with like security camps nearly, where they cordoned off that part, high security, reclaimed it, and then they moved the people with the help of the city of Cape Town to other areas, and then kept security there as well afterwards, but not as intensive. And kilometer by kilometer, they reclaimed it. Okay, we can go on. And we're getting definitely new rolling stock. Those nice blue trains, I don't know who of you have been in them, but they're very cool. And that's world standard trains that we have. Then we have e-hailing. Since 2010, Uber, Bolt, InDrive, they get babies every day. There's a new one coming onto the market. But they've always been treated the same as the meter taxis in Cape Town, and also according to the law, the new regulations of the NLTA Amendment Act will have new regulations specifically for them. As you know, they pick up and drop off wherever you want to be. Next one, point. They're informal and unregulated, and that is actually gave used to us putting a moratorium on the provision of licenses for them. In 2021, we then did a very detailed study about the demand and supply. And in March 2023, we uplifted the moratorium, and we provided the licenses that is within what we can handle in the city of Cape Town. Of course, they said originally it is just electronic payments, you know, but that you do beforehand, but we do know that they do take cash as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, then achieving accessible, equitable, and sustainable public transport into the future. What are we going to do? And this is just some of the ideas of what we have. Okay, I think put all of them up on and then we can go through them. So what we said is that we know what has happened in the past, but we have to learn the lessons. If we don't learn the lessons, it is absolutely ridiculous. And therefore, also we know that unfortunately we have a very unstable and unreliable future. We don't know what's going to happen. The future is uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy. There's a lot of informality, or we call it there in the positive way, degrees of formality, but it is expected that the city of Cape Town will double in the next 10 years in terms of people coming to Cape Town, because there is some work opportunities available there. But what do we do? How do we provide for those people that is moving in all the time? There's fiscal uncertainty. We know there's not enough money. Climate change has a big effect. It's getting warmer and it's getting drier. Although if you were in our winter this year, you don't believe that it's getting drier. We had severe storms, but it is not Cape Town weather as you know it, where it drizzles like in England. It was storms. I think I was the only one in my office that was excited seeing thunder coming from Gauteng. And there was lightning, and I could actually say, wow, the rest of them were disappearing. Growing urban population, as I said, and then we have to look at the interdisciplinary problem solving is required. So what we have looked at is to actually look at physical mobility, then your spatial mobility, as well as your digital mobility, because a lot of people have not gone back to the office, or they are going back 2 or 3 days a week. So we have to adapt into the future of what is the future mobility requirements going to be. It might be better Wi-Fi systems, 5G, 6G, going up in the Gs. So that is what we've taken into account in our integrated public transport plan for the future. So we have not just looked at transport at all. Okay. So it is important to leverage public transport planning and implementation, as well as operations, as a catalyst for positive economic development and sustainable outcomes. In the phase 2A that I showed you two pictures of, we've used a lot of local labor. We can also attest to having serious problems with the construction mafia, but we could resuscitate small businesses. For instance, providing concrete to the depots, etc. And we have testament of various of those people who can tell us about how we actually saved the, as a city, saved the little businesses. So into 2040 and beyond, the lessons we've learned can drive equitable future we seek for South Africa and the cities and our economies. But what do we require? What is the conditions? The public transport must be resilient. We must keep up with technology. And we must, we are looking, we've just put out tenders. I can't say too much, but we put out a tender for electrical vehicles. And one of the most expensive part of bringing in electrical vehicles is actually our import tax. So also, Treasury must look at the import tax regime and how can they actually assist the cities and the operators to be able to bring in new technology, because we're keen on the new technology, but it just priced the bus out of the sky. Then also public transport is part of the whole community, the economy, the ecological environment. Financial planning and preparation is very important. Yes, we must plan, but plan to implement, plan to move forward, because the better your plan and your financial plan, the better you can implement. Solutions that are contextually appropriate, and that is where we sit in terms of not being mobile, being mode agnostic, the best mode for the amount of people that you want to move. and then a combination of disciplines to manage public transport challenges. Uh, in the past, it was very much engineers that ran with the public transport, the infrastructure, operations, etc. And here comes a transport economist and tells the engineers what to do, which was fun, I must say. And all the disciplines, your town planners, your financial people, everybody must be part of this road that we all, this path that we are going on to get more and more public transport in the right place. I think this is the end, but let's just see. Yep, that's it. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the panel discussion. I want to just start by thanking our esteemed speakers and just some takeaways that I have noted myself to just kick off the discussion. From Prof. Hensche's presentation, I think what stood out for me is the need for flexibility. I think in South Africa, we can attest to also the challenge of silos driving our system and causing majority of the problems that we have. I think the flexibility is really important right from the beginning in strategy formulation. Government needs to be open for collaboration with industry, the unions, the operators, to design contracts that are going to be fit for purpose. It doesn't help to have this beautiful contract on paper, but in reality, it does not provide the mobility services that are going to address our societal needs and also provides the business opportunities for operators that encourage more operators to want to participate in the bus service provision to enhance mobility for our citizens as a whole. So flexibility is very important for the strategic planning and implementation, but also in budgets to make for provisions for the unforeseen costs. As we know, nothing is certain and cast in stone. We wouldn't have imagined there would be wars in Russia, Ukraine, impacting oil prices and so forth. So all of those things in the end impact the service provision and have to be accounted for to allow for an enabling environment for services to continue. Another interesting thing was the performance-based contracts. It's important to also bring about those measures in the market to ensure that operators remain with the goal of providing the best service, but also making sure that the tax dollars that are being spent bring value for money. There's more need for more time to analyze the risks. I'm not sure enough is done to deliberate and engage various stakeholders when policies, acts, amendments are put on the table. I think more time needs to be dedicated to deliberate those risks and come up with new strategies to not new strategies, but to see why what we have is not working and what the challenges are. From the Lean's presentation, we all know that our history has created the problems that we have, the lack of funding, the planning, the historic planning, but a lot has also been done and a lot of innovations exist in the South African public transport landscape. As academics, we talk about mobility as a service, and we've heard from Prof. Henscher the lessons that the challenges that it presents, but also it cannot be a plug and play. Each environment is unique and different. So, for example, the Dial-A-Ride, an on-demand service that is successfully being implemented in Cape Town, it's a first world service, part of mobility as a service, but we have it here in South Africa. So there are a lot of investments that have happened in recent times, the BRT, the Gautrain, the PRASA recapitalization. So there's a lot of good things, but there are also a lot of silos that we need to address and work together. Collaboration for me stands out as the takeaway from the two talks. A lot of collaboration is required for us to take public transport forward. So that is my end on hogging the mic. I'm going to open the floor for questions. Please to engage our two panelists.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Motswane, the incoming chairman of SAPOA PEC Gauteng. Just 2 questions to Thailand. Regarding the IRPTNs, what would it, in your view, what would it take broadly to sustain these IRPTNs in the country? Another one is what would be the protection of the former MBT operators that have collaborated with government in ensuring that these BRTs are a success? And another one is what would it take to enhance efficiencies so that these IRPTNs become legacy projects, not just event? I think the last one is quite recently there was a fracas in Cape Town between MBTs and e-hailing, and it's kind of like went down quietly now. Is it quiet because sleeping dogs are lying down, or it's quiet because there was some integration initiatives that have been put in place to ensure that these various modes operate symbiotically? Almost the last one. I've not heard you say much about transformation, transition, and capacitation of former MBT operators that have come into BRT. Many years ago, I went to Quito in South America to see an example of a failed BRT system. Now, when I look at the situation, it looks like Quito is coming to Joburg. As you may be aware, that Ria Vaya is going down the declivity at a high speed. Thank you.
We'll just take those 5 questions, which you promised were 2 first, and then we'll go to the next ones. So please just remember your questions. I'll ask her to answer these ones because there were quite a few.
I didn't bring paper with the writing down. Thank you very much. Okay, how to sustain it? Well, it's a very expensive service that we have provided with the BRTs or the IRPTNs, but we don't talk about the IRPTN, we're talking about the IPTN, Integrated Public Transport Network, because you can't have rapid everywhere. So I will just keep it then to what we are looking at, and that is that we are talking to national government in terms of the PTNG, the grant that we get for infrastructure and operation, that the more that the infrastructure are completed, the grant should then be, we should start talking about in terms of the grant terms for operational sustainability. So that is the only one that I can, that's the big thing that we work on. I can't speak on behalf of Johannesburg. I don't know what's happening here, but not that I don't know what's happening here. I'm following very closely what's happening here, but I don't want to go there and then I say something that I shouldn't. But in the city of Cape Town, our rates contribution are topped. We can't go higher than the 4.2% that we are getting. And that is why we run a very, very tight ship. Our assets are very, very well used. And so I really can't speak on behalf of the others. Then what your second one, that is a very loaded question. I must be honest, and I can sometimes see you looking at me, and it's really a loaded question because You're asking me in terms of the collaboration between government and the operators. Our collaboration in Cape Town is very good with our operators, our VOCs. But the issue is that we were also coming up to the end of our 12-year contract for our first phase. And we have requested the Minister of Transport to give us exemption because we followed very closely what happened in Johannesburg, to give us exemption in terms of the NLTA so that we can renegotiate. As Prof said this morning, I should actually have recorded you, Prof, because that is exactly what we wanted to do, but we are not allowed under the NLTA to go that way. So we have to, and I do, and we've, personally, in our circumstances, we're very concerned also because we are at a very good place in our negotiations with the industry, both the MBT as well as the bus company, the local bus company, for our phase 2 rollout. But the tendering process, we are very concerned that it is going to have a negative influence on that. In terms of the e-hailing and the MBTs, the city, we took responsibility there, and we do have meetings with both industries. And we are very strict in terms of what's going on in the city. And so it didn't just go away. It took a lot of negotiation. I don't want to speak out of house, but it is quiet at the moment. You never know with the industries what's going to happen next. But we take on the role of a mediator and negotiator. Like I said, or in my introduction, Prof said that I am the chairperson for the minibus taxi task team, which was established after the strike last year. And so we've had many iterations with them, and we're doing the same with the others as well. Then in terms of the capacitation of the industry, I have about 3 presentations I can give you on the capacitation of the industry, the minibus taxi industry into the systems in Cape Town. All of them were trained firstly in business management. They went to UCT. Into a course that was specifically developed for them. All the drivers have regular training. And also when we started off, we realized, for instance, some of the taxi drivers that we wanted to bring in as bus drivers were legally blind. They could not see. And then we started to actually give them, retrain them in other areas so that they can still be part of the VOC. But, and the capacity building has gone on through the years. I have, for instance, a monthly CEO meeting with the CEOs and then also with the board members, and they get regular training. And then everybody that is underneath that, and we will do the same with the new VOCs. I think I might have left one out, but I think you get the gist of it. Thanks.
Thank you. So please, can we keep it to 1 question per person? Then we can do subsequent rounds. Please introduce yourself, where you're from, and give us your question.
Good. It's okay. It's afternoon.
Sorry, and also who your question is directed to.
Okay, I would love to direct my question to Doctor. So my question will be, my name is Luyanda Mabizela from Shining Star Petrochem, Head of Operations. So I would love to direct my question to Doctor in terms of how do we study consumer behavior in transportation? And how do we ensure that in our study, we encompass the different customer segments? Because it's been a challenge, especially here in South Africa, that we currently have a challenge of if transportation inflation is contributing close to 44% in the overall inflation. And when we look at our neighboring countries, of which are developed transport systems like New York, they're servicing 3.2 million of commuters on daily through public transportation. Those includes of people with cars and so on. So now the question is that exactly how do we ensure that our transportation system, especially the public, caters for all customer segments, be it of middle and higher class? Thank you.
You take 3 questions for you.
Is it my turn now?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. My name is Bongani Khatebe, the Managing Director at Metrobus. Please note the lowering of the voice when it comes to Metrobus. We're providing an unreliable service at the moment. It's due to long years of disinvestment. So I'm not going to be very loud when it comes to that. But thank you, UJ, for this talk. Thank you, Edie. Thank you, Prof, for the presentations. Quite insightful. One can go to town on that. I'll avoid the preamble, program director. I had a long one planned, but I'll go straight to the questions. And that has to do with collaboration and partnerships. And I think that's key, especially if you think of the fiscal uncertainty that for Metrobus has started 3 years ago. And that translates itself now in the poor service that we have because of fleet availability. But I just want to then talk to the models from a local government perspective. You indicated, Prof, that South Africa should look into copying, maybe that's not the right word, Singapore and Netherlands. I say copying because we copied outcome-based education and look where we are today. But Singapore and Netherlands seems to be what we can do. But ED will tell you that we're highly regulated. The Municipal Finance Management Act in itself is prescriptive. And if you don't want to be flexible, you're going to have problems as an accounting officer, unless you be characterized somewhat. I won't mention the word in the room. But I'm sure all of us know what I'm talking about. So I just need to then check what are the specific local conditions that we should look into from those 2 models. To the ED, there's a lot to say there. We're just planning a trip to come down to Cape Town to learn from what we're doing, especially on the My City point of view. We're also on the tendering process. We won't say much. But from your perspective, especially in terms of, I'm envious. I wrote here that you have 30% turnover. I was like, yo, Batung. I'm sure oh my God, I'm sure your bonus will look good. But I just want to a few things on how to talk to sustainability, because if you're not going to talk about profitability, but we are now on the survival stage, but how to move out of those to then start talking about sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very brief, please. No introductions, preambles, straight to the questions. Thank you.
Kathy Bell, I am a SBOA Council member, RTMS committee member, and then also work for Standard Bank. Two observations. One is Dalian Algoa bus is still very much operational. NTI, yes, not. Just in terms of your one comment that you make, and well done on the 43% fare box collection. I think it's fantastic. I was in Cape Town 2 weeks ago. Public transport, yes, absolutely, it works. And then for Prof. Henscher, as a Threadbow dependent person, I must just say I'm busy packing for Malta, for sure. Your comments around MAS as a service, as a feature, not as a service, I think it's quite relevant, and I'm excited to see where it's going. And then one last comment on NCIS last night. They showed a Sydney bus And it was actually used your ability to actually record what's happening on the bus to actually resolve a crime. So I think that's great. Love to see the Sydney buses in operation. And I guess that's possibly part of your extended work that you did in Sydney. And then, yeah, as I said, I'm packing for Malta, and thank you for the contribution. And that's me out. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. Last question for this round. Then I'll.
Good day, everyone. I'm Kwesi Modise. I'm a UJ student studying transportation management. I have one question for the professor. How can transportation systems adapt to changing commuter needs, especially with the rise of remote work? And this is more looking into like the responsive service models.
Thank you. We'll take those 3 questions. Prof, there's 2 for you.
4 questions. I can't resist before I answer. As an academic, we always say in Australia, when an academic puts their hand up and say, I have 2 questions, they say, no, you don't, you have 1. Anyway, let's try and remember them one at a time over here. I apologize if I didn't quite get the full story, but my understanding, we're talking about collecting relevant data on travel behavior in order to have a better understanding of what's happening out there, in order to use that to respond to what sort of needs we need to deliver on in relation to what it is that the customer really wants. One of the things that's so valuable in Sydney is an annual household travel survey. Rather than we used to do one every 10 years, and it was a nightmare to get Treasury to fund it. And I was responsible for designing a rollover survey. So every year we do about 2,000 interviews. And this becomes extremely rich data because the market changes over time, all modes of transportation, including freight. And we ask supplementary questions each time according to a recent agenda topic. And I think that's what you need. And I have to say, in this day and age where people think that artificial intelligence will give you what you want, do you know the best data is not out there. Unit record data is what you want on travel, and not aggregate data on webs. So be careful about artificial intelligence. And of course, then you have to train people that are good at data analysis and good at using the data for modeling. One of the concerns I've had historically, that modelers think it's all about modeling rather than the data at the end of the day is really what matters. Rubbish in, rubbish out, even though I'm a modeler. So I think that's the best way to answer that question. In terms of your question, great question, building partnerships, trust and collaboration, one of the things that, and it takes time, there are 2 ways of doing it, but one that we found extremely successful is, first of all, running a training program. We call it the Certificate of Transport Management, which it's a 5-day course, and it's got people in there from teaching from industry, from government, from university, and people who attend are regulators, operators, manufacturers. After 4 days, doesn't work online. The networking is amazing. It's breaking down barriers. And we put about 100 people through every year now, and the partnership trust is growing. Of course, you've got to do it all the time because the people change. I think the other thing that's very important is it is education. People understanding that they are in a supply chain and their role is as important as the other person. And it's only as strong as the weakest link. And I have to say, in general, in most parts of the world, the weakest link in general has been the regulator. That's the problem. And we're trying to do something about that now. The question over here to do with, what was it again? Remote working and working from home. Yeah, well, wonderfully. First of all, as a result of working from home, and by the way, maybe like this part of the world, we still haven't returned to full use of public transport. One of the problems during COVID is people bought a second car because they were worried about the health risks. And of course they buy it, they're not going to get rid of it. They're going to continue to use it. So, but what's happened is a lot of that traffic has moved to the off-peak because of the flexible working hours. There's another definition of flexibility. And what we find in Australia now, that roughly half of commuting takes place in Sydney outside of the peaks. This raises fundamental questions about infrastructure priorities going forward. Less focus on congestion on the big roads, but also what we call living locally and developing improved infrastructure locally, which is a lot of the micro-mobility stuff, and better use of local bus services. But what I can say is that we're now turning some of our strategic models up off their head. So we have recently revised the Sydney travel model for the government to build in the probability of working from home, by what time of day, by what day of week at different locations. It has a huge impact on the traffic. And by the way, if you're into climate change and you want to reduce CO2, we're able to show under current working from home practices, there's a 5% reduction in CO2 emissions for passenger transport. What other transport policy could give you 5% other than everybody buying an electric vehicle in time? So I'm increasingly of the belief that non-transport policies may have a bigger impact than transport policies on the performance of the transport network. And this is land use. We talk about, I should have said it, we've just built a brand new spanking new metro, which almost parallels the conventional rail, which is a bit of a problem because it then reinforces serving the wealthy. And it's interesting, the switching into the new metro, which is highly automated, most of the people who are using it used to use the conventional rail because it's quicker, 100 kilometers an hour. And I use conventional rail and I love it because I'm guaranteed a seat now. Thank you very much. But what has it done to the bus services? They've cancelled half the bus services to force people to use the metro. That is bad policy. I've seen this in so many countries. But you have to then build that into the models. And you know what you need? You need very competent simulated models that can quickly give you advice on the likely outcomes. The trouble is, many government agencies hire a consultant to do some sophisticated modeling that takes a year or 2 years, and they do a couple of applications. And by then, the policy questions have changed. So I'm happy to share with you some developments we've got now using high-speed computers where we can analyze virtually any policy in 40 minutes. That's how it's useful, so the politicians can get quick answers. The consultants don't like it. Sorry.
Okay, in terms of I just want to say that we don't always put too much faith in the National Travel Survey. So what we also do in terms of customer profiling is to have dedicated groups that we go and speak to and do profiling in that way, where we have different types of people and we get groups together and then get the needs from them. In terms of sustainability, like I said, we don't just have a morning and afternoon peak service. We have a full day service. We sweat our assets day and night. It's a completely different from the Golden Arrow services, for instance, where they have a morning and then the buses stand over and then at night they go, they work again. That's one of the things. Also optimizing it as much as possible. But the most important thing, if you want to have a sustainable service, is to have a reliable service. A service where people know that that bus is going to be there every day. And that is why when we last year got with the war in the Ukraine and everything, the fuel prices went just up and up and up. And we were in a serious deficit in terms of our operating cost. We said the one thing that will not happen is that we will cut the service. We will look at other places where to save operating cost within the system, but not cutting services. And that is the big thing. As soon as, if you lose a customer, you don't get them back. And it took us 3 years, but we are, with less vehicles, we are carrying more passengers than before COVID. And it is just growing day by day, our passenger numbers, and we are absolutely putting in more and more services all the time. Although the footprint is still the same, but it's also important that you have proper connections between your services and with other operators. We work there again very closely with the minibus taxi industry to make sure that there is feeders and also that last mile services. And then with rail coming back, the same thing. This was now not a commuter service, but with the Springbok match that was in Cape Town, it was the first time that the rail was up and running again. And within 2 days, we were able to work with PRASA and get a full system ready for that Saturday. And there were no congestion in the city at all. Everybody parked and ride and used the system that is provided.
Just want to add something. I totally agree about surveys. I mean, it's not just travel surveys where you ask people to keep diary. In-depth interviews and focus groups and segments are so important. Qualitative research is becoming increasingly more important. And I don't want students to think that a good transport economics degree must do a lot of statistical modeling. It's useful, but talking to people and understanding segments is very powerful, but there are skills on how you do it. I think the other thing that's really interesting is, and I've just been committed to working on the Brisbane 2032 Olympics as an advisor. And of course, what we're going to try and do is to not stop building things that will be no use after the Olympics, to try and make better use of what we've already got. And I think that's always a continuing question. Look at what we've got and how we can make better use of it. I'm even going to suggest a proposal here that UJ starts a certificate of transport management, which is a 4-day course that they work in conjunction with industry and the associations to attract people to come and understand what each of the parties in the supply chain do. It breaks down barriers. And I don't know whether you have such a thing here at the moment, but I think you don't want to have to go and spend 3 years doing a degree. You want to come in for a week of someone that's in the industry and refresh their understanding of who they work with. And it works. So that's my best advice. I look forward to seeing it.
I'll come and lecture.
I have that on record, Darlene. Thank you. All right, we are a bit behind time. Our program is at the end, but I will allow you a round of further questions if you still have any, if you're happy with that. There were still a few hands. Okay.
My name is Ronald Moringai from the IMM Graduate School, and mine is directed at Prof. David. I think it's a very quick one regarding the contracting situation. I've just completed my LLB the other day, so you're kind of messing up my thinking here regarding the contracting bit, and especially when you talk about the contract becoming more responsive, flexible rather than prescriptive. And I think in terms of risk reduction, would it not then make any sense to try and reduce any potential anomalies in the future in the run out of the contract where things have been prescribed rather than, leave things where, we can make it as flexible as possible. So I think just if you can just touch on that and explain that a bit further, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is KG. I'm from Trans. I just want to know what is the protection of the minibus investors in this industry? Thank you.
Another question here.
Thank you. My name is Raven Shabe. I'm with the Johannesburg Roads Agency. Prof, I'm going to make comments and I don't expect any answers, but if there are answers, it's okay with me. Firstly, there is no BRT operationally in South Africa. We've got buses, but it's not BRT. My colleague obviously mentioned some of the challenges and exactly how you can identify a failed BRT system. The issue that I want to really focus on is the issue of, and I would like to pose the question to both Prof and the ED. It's both for Sydney as well as the Cape Town as well. We all know data, we have seen data in these conferences that taxis are the main public transport in South Africa. Hence, even today, there are no subsidies for taxis. That's a discussion for another day. If buses are the main transporter, why is suddenly now the government is focusing on rail and resuscitation of rail and refurbishment of rail? Look at the money that they're putting in rail now versus what they're giving for other mode of transport, which are transporting more passengers than rail. Doesn't make sense to me. The other important thing is that rail seems to be the focus, and rail seems to be it. What can you advise, Prof, in terms of academia, the experts, in advising government on future policies? Because we want to see solutions. I mean, we all know what the problems are. We want to see solution. Classical example is the flexible contract you spoke about. How are you going to help the business rescue practitioner now in Johannesburg to draw contracts that are going to be meaningful to the future BRT operators? The current contract basically asks them to sacrifice their livelihood for 12-year contract. That is the biggest flaw of that contract. So the question is, how does academia and people who know help people that are supposed to implement in terms of the regulator and the government? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take those 3 questions.
Yeah. How many hours have we got? Okay, over here. Right. And you're talking, I'm sorry if I've turned your head upside down, apologize for that. But I suppose the question that you asked was more to do with the fact that we want to move away from this more prescriptive model. And to be honest, a trip to Singapore would be really useful because we work with the Land Transport Authority. And I have to say, I'm a bit biased because many of the people that now run the contracts in there are ex-students of mine that are now back in Singapore. So they are smart people and they understand that the first thing that matters is to understand the market and to understand who you deal with in terms of delivering the service. These are management contracts. All the assets, all the depots, all the buses are owned by Singapore as part of their strategic plan commitment. So this aligns, and they bring in a bus operator to develop efficiencies because they can run it better, but not necessarily align with what they want to achieve. And so I think that's a really, really good point. And so the contracts are incomplete to the extent that a lot of the revision occurs once the contract is in operation. And as I said to you, when you bid, you're told that that's the deal, not, I'm sorry, you missed out because you didn't listen. Now, where was it? Oh, that's not for me. I think that's your question.
In terms of the guarantee for the taxi operators, if you listen to my earlier response to the gentleman at the back, you would have heard that we have written to the National Department of Transport requesting exemption of the NLTA to go out on tender. That is the only way that you can have protection. The NLTA was written in with a new tender with the idea, I think, at that time, that I thought that there was going to be a lot of operators all over the country running BRTs, consisting of previous taxi operators. We know that the only proper BRT, sorry gentlemen, I do not agree with you, proper BRT being run is in Cape Town. And so that is the first thing that our operators is asking us, where else must they tender? They can only tender for their own work. And that is why we went to that length to actually contact it. Also when the NLTA Amendment Act was done, that was one of our comments, is to take that out of the NLTA so that we can renegotiate contracts. We have operators who has operated very well and who, if they weren't operating well and they didn't deliver the service that we expect of them to deliver, they would have been gone already because we would not have accepted a low standard. That is the only guarantee that there is. I think I can't say much more because we're now going into all the different processes and I can't put my counsel in a bad position in terms of that. But our operators, minibus taxi operators, know what we are doing as a council to ensure their futures.
I know you said there were just questions and I didn't need to answer them, so thank you for that. But obviously I'm part of a global BRT centre, but we do have some BRT in Australia, not as much as we would like because of that rail bias you've just mentioned. It's almost become a second-class citizen to the rail. But having said that, our focus really is not so much on a BRT that's independent of the bus operators, but creating corridors that are dedicated to buses and high occupancy cars as well, to enable the bus operators to have a more efficient service. And we have quite a few of them, but we don't call them bus BRT, we just call them bus lanes. Not so exciting. And one of the challenges we face is to have them connected, because there is a bit of a disconnection. One of the saddest indictments, I'm afraid, by working with toll road companies over the years is I wanted to persuade them to dedicate, as we built a new toll road, one lane in the cities to buses. But it got kicked on the head from politics because there's not as much money in that as there is putting cars in that lane. The thing that I'm passionate about, but nobody's mentioned, but it's very challenging, is road pricing reform, whereby we need to totally rethink the pricing models we use, not only for public transport fares, but also car use and ownership. And we talked a lot about in Sydney of moving away from fixed charges for cars to distance-based charges with an equity cap built into them, and this is the way of managing the benefits you get by using the road network. And some of that money that's raised, assuming that drivers are no worse off, and that's an ultimate criterion, can be put back to improving public transport. And so integration should be also financial within the system as well as outside. You know, we have a lot of equity investors that are looking to spend money in the transport sector, but they want certainty from government that if they do that, they will not change the rules. And I suspect that could be a challenge here, but I don't know. We're now looking increasingly to having a lot of equity partners in actually moving more and more into all forms of public transportation. They would sooner put their money into building roads and put their money into public transport. Our public transport percentage, by the way, in Sydney is 20%. It's not very good. And it's been like that for years. And that's because to make public transport more attractive, we have to make the car less attractive. And I suspect that's with you guys. I mean, one of the things, I always remember this years ago when China was starting to move out to be an economic capitalist. I often said, you want to be careful when you get rich about people aren't going to use the railways anymore. Oh, no, 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 they're going to use the railways. How wrong were they? They all bought cars, didn't they? You have a similar problem here, don't you? The wealthier you get, the more cars you buy. The pricing model is way out of whack. And I'd like to see you do something about this, but politicians don't like it. And my final comment, which you'll find is hilarious, is that whenever I talk to a politician friend about road pricing reform, their comment is, wash your mouth out. I understand what that means.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our program. I would like to ask our panelists to just give us some concluding remarks before we round off our program. We'll start with you, Prof.
Right. On the spot. Okay. No, where to start? I mean, thank you very much for this. I think it's been a fantastic session and what a turnout. I guess, you know, Nolene said that for those who are interested in contracts, and I have to say, although I might have been referring mainly to bus, it applies to all contracts. Flexibility and budget contingencies are very, very important. And I know that might be a hard ask because it's a major reset in what you do. But I really think it can be done if all the partners in the supply chain work together. And if we run a certificate of transport management here, we might get more people thinking about it. It'll take time, and I hope that happens. Next time I give a talk, we'll talk about integrated multimodal transportation, which is a very important issue, but it does require serious rethinking about how you integrate those modes of transportation and what incentives need to be put in place. And I think we're a long way from achieving that, not just here, but elsewhere.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I just want to acknowledge my lecturer, Professor Walters. I just told him that it's exactly 40 years ago that I wrote my last exam for my first degree. So it is really a privilege for me to have been here today. From my side, I think I want to end with where I started when I presented, and that is we have good plans. We have good policies. We must implement it. But the thing is that our resources are going to be more and more constrained, and we must make the most of what we have. Even in Cape Town, we, in our new IPTN, we are not looking at the next BRT. We are looking at the right mode at the right place, and then also doing it incrementally. So where you build up to a BRT, a light rail, a heavy rail, whatever is needed in future. And you all have a contribution to make towards that future. But always there's one thing that you have to have in the front of your mind. And that's not you, it's not your plan, it's the passenger, because we serve our commuters. And that is the only important people. Thank you.
So as a token of our appreciation, thank you very much.
Very much.
Prof, I hope you have enough kilograms.
You mean in my stomach or in the lung?
Both. Thank you very much.
Let's give
Okay.
him a hand again.